this is episode 4 of the Historical Miniature Gamers podcast. We're calling this Road to Skulls. Skulls will be the first tournament that is going to be played post-COVID, which we're all a part of. Dan will be TOing. Today we're just going to all talk about bolt action. Can't see that on screen anyway. It is the best game out there. We are very excited because of post-COVID, we're able to game in person again. It's been a while. We did a bit of that tabletop simulator stuff for a while, but we're so excited to play the real game. And just for those who don't know, Australia's probably one of the least impacted countries in the world to COVID-19. So we have been safe and playing tabletop games for 3 to 4 weeks now. And most of the clubs in Perth have been doing the same. So we were in isolation for 2-3 months, something like that. But we have been happily playing bolt action for a while. And for comparison, Perth specifically also hasn't had any cases for 3 to 4 weeks, something like that. So it's actually been fairly minute, safe for us to do so. So we are kicking back with an event in 2 weeks, which we're all really excited to start playing again. I think we've got 20 people confirmed for on the side, which is
on the side.
Which is a Outpost 6030 event, which is a different club to where we play out, which is the Rockingham Historical Gamers, but they have been holding the torch for the bolt action tournament scene for many years, and we're so excited to come see them again. So, did we want to get straight into the event?
Yeah, I think it'd be good to have a bit of a breakdown of that. Obviously, I'm the TO, so I'm across that is a bit more detail. On the side, there's a little bit of play on words for our pathetic attempt at German, but there's a big focus throughout the day on side mission objectives that'll get you extra points throughout the games. And there's also a bonus prize for the best objective marker and presentation of that to sort of get in the theme of having fun. But a big part of this mission set is going to be just taking what would be a regular rulebook mission, and then while you're trying to play that mission, how can you actually nail these extra objectives on the side? Because as you start adding victory points to these things, they become the big sort of tiebreakers. And so a couple of our missions, technically, you'd normally expect draws, and so these side objectives are going to be very important.
I found that in that game that we've been doing some practice games at RHG for Skulls, and the game that you and I had, Jake, that was pretty much what happened. We were playing key positions, and I had sort of a comfortable lead build up, but key positions is not an accumulating sort of victory point game. It's scored right at the end. The side missions are scored as you earn them. So it was really interesting because that game, if we just played it strictly to rulebook, would have actually ended as a draw. And it was really nice to be able to see those side objectives in a practice, in a friendly environment, actually deliver the difference that sort of we'd expected and we were hoping would be the case.
So I've played 3 games of it so far. I think 2 in key positions and 1 in demolition. All of them ended up in a draw for the traditional victory conditions, but it was the side missions that pushed us above. So I'm just going to very quickly give our listeners a feel for the event. So we're playing 3 rounds, 2 hours each. It's a 1,000 point army, which can include theater selectors. Just having a look, doesn't look like there's too many more conditions than that. 12 order dice, single platoon, either if that's reinforce or theater. And the missions we're playing key positions, which is basically the kill point mission. Key positions, sorry, I said meeting, I meant to say meeting engagement.
Yeah, you meant to say meeting engagement.
Meeting engagement, which is the kill point mission. key positions, which traditionally can be D3 plus 2 for the amount of objectives on the map, but we're just sticking with 5, so maximizing the objectives. And then demolition, where both players have a base on the either side of the map, and you have to end with a unit figure on that base to destroy it to win. But the side missions, the things that we're talking about, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 6 additional victory points that you can get for doing these little side objectives. So
that mission.
Yeah. So
mission. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So the first one off the top is He-Man, which is a player scores an additional VP if they destroy a unit with high explosive, which can be any high explosive, so a mortar or a howitzer, or deciding to shoot a tank shell at the HE variant. You've got Crosswalk. Player scores 1 additional VP for any other unit other than vehicles and transport. Units must be outside the transport to score points that end up within 12 inches of the opponent's table edge. Sharpshooter, player scores 1 VP for any model killed by exceptional damage. VAT 69, company intelligence officer is trying to track down a stash of scotch. And will offer a lead faster unit that tracks it down. To score 1 additional victory point, the player must have a unit on each table quadrant, so all 4 quadrants of the board. So you're contesting each quarter. You got to have a figure in each of those. Pincushion, player scores a VP if they pin out a unit. And Lieutenant Dan, a player scores a VP if they kill the opponent's lieutenant. At the end of each game, both all right, so then we're filling out a sheet and you calculate the points. So with all of those side missions in mind, Dan, just run us through how does that affect scoring?
Well, probably the biggest thing that makes a difference is a lot of these things are actually achievable for any army type. So, like if, for example, killing your opponent's lieutenant, oftentimes that's something that has other advantages in the game because you reduce the morale, you reduce the snap to, and so it's a nice bonus. If you're going to target that unit already, it's a quick extra point that you can pick up. Pincushion is, that's a funny one. It's hard to pin a unit out generally. Like in most of the games I've played, I've had maybe 1 or 2 units get pinned out over the course of all the years worth of gaming. Most of the time, they're killed by the time that you hit those pins. But if you do manage to do it, or if you've got someone close and you think you can do it, we'll give you a victory point. The VAT 69, the Scotch, that was just a nice fun one to put in there. It's important to understand with that one, both players can actually achieve that if they've all got models in all 4 quadrants. It still needs to be 1 unit per quadrant, but just because there's an opponent there won't stop you getting that victory point if you've got all 4. So it's trying to keep it easy for everyone to achieve. The sharpshooters, obviously for any exceptional damage, but in reality, any kills with a sniper. We all know that snipers don't hit the broadside of a barn. So if you get the kill, we'll give you a point.
Yeah.
And so again, and Crosswalk and He-Man are also in that similar vein. It's simple things that you can do that you can get some additional points for. Generally, though, it's going to force you to do something that you wouldn't normally want to do potentially at that time in the game. So there's still a choice involved. I expect what we will see is that the players that just play to the mission, the main mission, they might win the game, but they won't get the most points because if they're not focused on these side objectives, they're letting 6 points go. And to give you an idea on how it's scored overall, a win just for the game is worth 3 points. But you've obviously got 6 points that are on these side objectives. So if you lose the game, but achieve all the side objectives, you'll actually have 6 points instead of 3, which means that you'll lose the game, but you'll actually have more points than your opponent.
Cool. A few things that... have come up with
Sorry,
me.
Also... Go, Jacob.
Cool. He-Man. I've had many of all my games. We've had a couple of units wipe out as a result of high explosive, but not necessarily the high explosive itself. Typically, it takes out a couple of units, then they have to do a pin check, and then they have to go. I don't think that counts.
No, so HE-Man specifically is you score an additional victory point when the unit is destroyed by the high explosive blast. So that means that the blast itself, when it's dealing the damage, wipes the unit out. So that makes it a little bit tougher because you can't just go for a 50% kill, hypothetically a light mortar on a fixed weapon team. It gets the 2 hits, gets the kill, does the 2 pins, they roll, just high enough and they break. That won't count. If the light mortar somehow manages to hit 3 models in that fixed team because of the opponent's poor positioning, it kills all 3, that would count. But not if they just fail the morale check as a resultant from the damage. It's got to be when you do that damage roll that you literally kill everyone. So heavy howitzers are going to be very popular. Heavy mortars are going to be very popular. Anything that can put out a giant size template.
It's going to be deadly.
Yeah.
What you got, Gotchin?
There was a few cases where in some of the practice matches, I made completely different decisions that I would normally make just because of some of these side objectives and how these opportunities presented themselves. I was playing against my opponent had a couple of green squads in his list, and just because I wanted to force the check, I fired. I can't even remember what it was. It was like a lone rifleman observer or something. I used his rifle to shoot at the inexperienced squad. I landed a hit, got the pin, didn't end up killing anybody. I got the casualty, and he rolled the check, and then he added +6 pins. So now his inexperienced squad was at 7 pins. And I was like, oh, well, this decision's easy. I take my sniper team to fire at the same squad who's out in the open and hasn't gone down. He misses completely. Which is what we would have expected to happen. And then
that's why when you kill someone, we give you a point.
Yeah, I was hoping to score 2 victory points right there. Like, he doesn't even get the hit, 66% chance. So to prove a point, I advance my lieutenant onto the board because he was in reserve. I advance him onto the board to sort of show them how it's done, and he takes a pot shot and he misses as well. And I was just, it's like 1 pin away from pinning out this squad, and I couldn't do it. And it was like right at the bottom of the turn. And then, of course, he pulls the first dice. He rallies the unit to stop me from getting 2 victories. Because I would have done the same thing again. I would have started with the sniper and try to get the two
try to get the pin off.
There. Yeah. To get the pin and the exceptional damage with the sniper and be done with it.
Get the double up.
But yeah, no, I wasn't given that opportunity. And the flip side of that is, if I had an enemy unit there with 7 pins on it, I would have ignored it for the rest of that turn. Yeah, in a normal game, I wouldn't have bothered throwing another 2 or 3 activation dice at it.
Yeah, at an inexperienced
squad. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's it's there to sort of create those decisions where you may not normally. It's opportunity cost, right? So we're now presenting additional objectives where you can score points for doing something that you wouldn't normally do. But this time it's got a better payoff, and so the value of that choice is suddenly higher, as opposed to simply playing out the mission the way it is. Now, I still encourage everyone, play the mission. It's good to win games. Winning battles but not the war is not always the best way to play war games. But definitely, there are the classic ones that are there. Some of these are obviously ones we've pulled from other events and sort of tweaked them a little bit and put them in. But yeah, we think these are going to hang around for a while. They're pretty popular, and everyone likes sort of, I guess, an additional element. Even if the game's going bad, a way to get points back, so that you can minimize the loss. Feels like the game's a bit closer then.
Yeah, I might just continue with the side missions because I think there's a few additions to. I think Crosswork and VAT69 both have the caveat that neither of those can be claimed by units that have come off from outflank.
Outflank, yeah.
Yep.
So I think definitely. Where are we?
Be interesting to clarify if it's just outflank or if it's a reserve as well.
I believe that we were planning on it just being outflank. The intent being that you can't just rumble onto a flank and therefore get a victory point.
Yep.
Or if you're the Finns and come off from their table edge.
Well, if you don't like Finns, play Bulgaria. You just don't let them outflank. Just looking for the exact wording.
It brings up some interesting questions about deployment. I certainly found myself deploying differently because of it. I had an interesting realization is probably the highest praise word I can give is when we were playing key positions there, Jacob. I realized I had a key position objective marker in my deployment zone. So I didn't actually park any units on that until the end of near about halfway through the game. And what I had was I just kept one of my infantry squads in reserve. And it was just a little under 6 inches from the board edge. And I just advanced them onto the point, parked them in cover and left them there. Because I figured a unit not on the board is basically invincible, right? And I was like, well, I don't need to. Well, that's why I waited till about turn 3 or turn 4 instead of turn 5. Turn 6. But there were veteran and Americans ignore the -1 anyway, so I didn't mind that. I think the odds were in my favor for that one. So it was and I think there was a few things about sort of the VAT-69 mission as well that encourages a similar sort of play, having some units
can come on your
that you can fill. And actually be a lot more sticky than a spotter or a mortar or a howitzer team or something like that.
That was another thing that somebody brought up the other day when I was going through some list building scenarios, is that not only artillery units, teams like machine guns and snipers could count for things like key positions, but also their spotters too. So
Actar from over east dropped that little cherry in the comments.
And I was like, oh, okay, there's a use after this has like done its duty. But to clarify, I'm fairly certain if the team dies, the spotter goes too, right?
Oh yeah. So if essentially they are still, the spotter's primary responsibility is still line of sight for that weapon. So if that weapon is removed, the spotter goes, well, back to base, need to get reassigned. So he disappears off. So he's not killed per se, but he essentially plays no further part in the battle and is taken off as part of that unit. And that's just to keep it clean. You pay the points on the unit that was just killed, so it makes sense to take him off when that unit is pulled. But whilst he is alive, you can do all sorts of things. He is still an infantry model. A lot of people sometimes forget that, because most of the time they just use him for line of sight because they want to be firing the main weapon. But he can run, he can charge, he can shoot, he can hold objectives, he can jump in the back of a transport and be a gunner. There's all sorts of things that they can do that a regular infantry unit can. You just normally don't bother because you want the howitzer firing, or you want the mortar firing, or in the rare case, you want the multiple launcher firing. Very rare case. I think there's one Soviet weapon that does that, but largely, it's those subtleties that we don't often think about in the game, right? And they're the things that, knowing that your spotter is able to hold objectives, when you actually put them on the board, it's now simply more than a consideration of, am I doing this just for the line of sight, or am I doing this now because I might want to run him on the last turn and put him somewhere?
So did we come to a conclusion with Cross and VAT?
Yeah, it actually doesn't say in version 3 of the Players Pack that outflank is excluded. I think it did in an earlier version,
and we took it on out. A post. Okay, right.
Yeah, so it's not currently on the Players Pack, so it could be on a post.
Yeah.
But I can't. I guess I'll have to look into that one and validate it on the day. I don't want to say on a podcast that it is or is not, and then it be totally wrong.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'll check in and validate that on the actual day. I just remembered I'm doing the paint scoring judging for the objective as well. I've got to figure that out. just as like, you're going to be doing the criteria, and the only criteria that you have to worry about is that it's like a 50 mil round and like looks cool. And I'm like, that is not helpful at all.
Mine is much bigger than 50 mil. It's going to sit on a 50 mil base, but like it's going to be this huge plane on top.
yeah, it's fine. I will. At the end of the day, there's always a little bit of I'm going to have to be subjective about it, and that's always viewed by people as non-subjective. So there's always that tricky part to it, but there will be, I guess, some sort of checklist or guide that I'll have developed to go, this is what I'm expecting to see. There's likely to be an element of cool and theme as weighing factors for the objectives. But it's leave that to me. Don't worry about it. I'll just, on the day, I can't win anything, so I've got nothing to slant it for in my favor. But I'm looking forward to seeing what people have done. There's a few good ideas that have been sent to me already.
All right. Fantastic. Are you building anything fancy, Gorchin?
Yeah, because my theme's sort of paratrooper with my US collection, and this list is more sort of force recon. So they're sort of late war. They're not doing a lot of jumps at this point. They've linked up with some armored support and some pioneer platoons rather than relying on their own guys. So the theme of this one is more sort of advanced forward recon. So I've only got a light tank. I've got a couple of transports. My guys are pretty well grounded at this point. But so the objective mark that I'm going for is a supply drop that's caught in a tree. So my 50 mil base is going to have, obviously it's going to have a tree on it. I've yet to stitch the parachute, but I've made little supply box, and then I have to hang the supply box on the parachute, and then I have to hang the parachute on the tree. So it's not going to be glued. So it's going to be a little fragile, but hopefully you should be able to actually see the supply crate swinging in the tree if you tap it.
Oh wow!
Don't shake Gorchin's objective,
or tap it very gently. So because I was looking at the scale of the things that they would have been realistically, and I was like, I do not have a tree that big that's going to fit on a 50 mil base. And I wasn't keen on stitching. I think it was like a 12-inch parachute circumference, and I was like, that's not going to happen. So that's going to be fun. I've got the material and everything like that, and I'm working on a pattern to actually get it to be a dome, because you can't just cut out a circle because it doesn't actually make a dome. I've only got 2 weeks and I've yet to start stitching the parachute, but everything else is done, so I think we should be fine. I hope.
Good. I look forward to seeing it.
If it's a supply crate next to a tree, you know what's happened.
Yeah, the parachute got torn.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Oh dear. Yeah, and I mean, so we've got obviously On Decide that is coming up, but I don't know if you guys have noticed, but the Rockingham historical events page went from like COVID with nothing to there's not a free weekend anywhere anymore.
No,
it's just packed. Jacob, can you just explain some of the things that you know about that are going on?
Okay. So what is confirmed? We have 3 events that are linked to Gorchin's Varsity project, which we talked about on the last podcast and the first one as well. So we've got a Wings of Glory event, which is a scale miniature airplane game in World War II. So it's going to be like, Spitfires and ME-109s. We're going to perhaps build a mat together in the club. We've got a couple of other sky mats as well. It's a really easy, simple game to get people into who've never played a war game, never played a board game or anything like that. But it's also got fun and thematical stuff that we're all interested in as well. It's a great filler game to chuck in at the end of a day. It's a great game to just get people involved, and we've got plenty of planes that we don't need people to commit to spending money to play the game. We've played Wings, we've probably set up maybe 3 events so far, and maybe played it once or twice on top of that as well. We've got a few videos out there on YouTube on how to play Wings too. So that's a really fun one. And then we've got a firefight event, which will mirror some of the stuff that Dan set up for the firefight event we played just before COVID, which is episode 2 of this podcast. And then we've got Varsity itself, which is the multi-board setup that Gorchin has made. That's going to require 6 or 8 players to play.
6 players, yeah.
6 players, 3 boards. 3 divisions of boards, however that matches up. So Gorchin's made all of the terrain. We're really excited to do it. So we got all that. Then we put up a poll on what people want to do and what they want to do.
Because 4 wasn't enough.
No. The number one thing we got out, other than Varsity, was that people want to do the doubles event again, which was a 2v2 for bolt action. We haven't quite discussed that, Dan, but I'm hoping we're going to do it soon. Don't know when, but more so like let's launch the event. We've got Cruel Seas has picked up a lot during COVID. So Wayne and Chris are setting up a Cruel Seas event the week before the first Varsity event. And then I painted up all of the, let me click, love it. Great. Zoom has given us post 40 minutes. Perfect. I've painted up all of the 148 stuff. I really want to set up a beginners tournament around that. And my sort of feelings on that is I'll supply a couple of armies for people. I'll supply all of the terrain, and I'll supply the unit cards. People can either use the figures I've got or they can use their bolt action minis. It doesn't matter because the base size is the same and you're really measuring from base to base. So if things look a little bit bigger or smaller, I don't really care. I just want to kind of promote what the game is, and if people like it, they can use their bold action minis with it. They don't have to commit to buying the figures, and the rule set is free and all that kind of stuff. So that's definitely good one.
The figures look awesome though. They're really cool, and that slightly larger scale, so more I guess impressionable detail for you to be able to pick out as a painter as well.
Yeah, they look pretty good, especially, you just base coat and wash and dry brush like I do. They come out all right. So maybe that's the mini itself and not my painting. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, we got all that. I don't know what else we're going to do because at the moment we're busy every weekend for the next month or two. And that's really a passion of interest of people wanting to get back into the hobby post-COVID. Normally I wouldn't put this many events on all at the same time.
You mean the 7 that I counted?
Yeah. I wouldn't put them all back to back, but yeah, I mean, I've been hungry for hobby as well. We're going to be tired halfway through it, but I think it's great. I'm even forgetting more. Then we're going to do another game family day, which is kind of like a different venue that we have like barbecues and stuff. And I know that Chris is really passionate about Sharps Practice. I'm not sure which variant that is, if that's American Civil War or something else.
I think it's American Civil War.
Could be. So I will jump in because I know that they've got figures and all that, and they can teach me all about it. May as well learn another Lottie system. And then I'm really keen to just launch a Fistful of Lead event in the same style as the 148 at some point, and that's another game where you're playing 5 miniatures as your army, and it's a deck of cards for activation. It's kind of got a little similarities to bolt action, to getting your stuff to move around, and that is, I don't know what the proper word is, but basically it's independent of theme and what your miniatures are. Your Space Marines can fight Romans, which could fight World War II figures. So you can make some themed stuff, like you could grab 5 bolt action figures for 2 opposing forces and set it up on a World War II battlefield, and that would be good. But yeah, I would like to promote that a little bit more, just to show, hey, whatever figures you have, you can play this game. Why not?
Yeah, and it's cross genre. Like I've seen so many different war bands, I guess you'd call them, or teams that have started up that people have been doing, and they're like, oh, Fistful of Lead, I can do this and this and this. It's quite flexible, which is nice. And not being specifically tied to a miniature company is occasionally nice, because you get the flexibility to get really creative, or to have Space Marines fighting ancient Romans, and there's no way knowing that would be approachable in most game systems.
No.
I think my personal favorite team that I saw was I think it was Steve's Rolling Stones.
Oh mate,
yeah,
absolutely.
He quite literally based stones on like 25mm round bases, and he painted them really nicely, and he got the grass and stuff, and then he just gave them all traits, and he colored their bases so he could tell them apart.
And they destroyed my Special Forces Russian force.
Crushed by boulders.
Then there's another thing.
Suffice to say, we're busy, right?
Yeah.
Extremely, yeah.
And then there's another thing. Inadvertently, by COVID, the arrangements in the store that we play at the moment are limited in space, and that's designed around social distancing, which should kind of fall apart in a few weeks. But at some point in time, Dan and I were forced into playing on less than a 3x3 with our bolt action armies. And we probably finished the game in about 45 minutes. And we have given this a few titles where we went to the table and we're like, yeah, let's get a game in. And we're like, all right, I can't be bothered getting out of 4x6. Let's just chuck this mountain terrain on whatever this, like,
which was really, it was really lazy, because it was like 2 feet away, right?
Yeah. Super lazy, but and then we're like, all right, this is small. So what are we gonna do? And Dan's like, all right, we'll just allow all of the heavy weapons to, like, it's they don't have the minimum range. I'm like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So we finished the game in about 45 minutes, and we've given it a couple titles, Sudden Death, and I don't know. There was a few other things that we came up with.
There's a few that I think Sudden Death was the one that stuck.
Yeah. This game mode is awesome. We need to actually, like, sit down and modify it a little bit, but like it kills like 2 turns of movement, and you're straight into combat, and we're like losing 3 or 4 dice a turn straight up. And
well, I was. You were fine.
We still had fun, right?
Yeah, we did. So I guess the purpose behind this, when we put it together, was that we had limited board space. We wanted to play with our full army at 1,000 points, but we're just like, well, how can we make this work? And so by essentially saying no minimum range and you can only direct fire with heavy weapons or something like that. We have to work it out, like you said, but if you think about video games, there's a lot of RTSs have a sudden death mode where you're pre-built, your resources are preset, you're basically in the best position you possibly can be, and it's like 20 minutes of absolute chaos while you try and build your force up to go take on your opponent who's doing exactly the same thing, and all your technology is the best it's ever going to be, and all your it's that sort of a feel on the table in the board game. Like we just randomly sort of threw stuff down, did a very quick alternating deployment of where we were going to put things, and then it was dice in the bag and go. And virtually, like even our rifles, they were almost 24 inches from the get-go, so they didn't even really have to move, which basically just made it a 45-minute shooting match, which some people, I guess, wouldn't like that. But for the sake of getting something fast and quick done on the table, and yes, it was still fun. Bulgaria suffered many losses that day, but essentially lining things up and going tit for tat over the terrain, but only in almost a 24-inch space, was extremely different, and it was a lot faster. The attrition rate was a lot higher, but it meant that you could go through quicker. So the possibilities for that, if you know that you're building for that sort of an event, you build your army differently, and we'd probably really look at some of the rules and reset those. And but it was like no reserves or outflank, like everything has to be committed, and you basically, it's not necessarily the first dice wins, because bolt action doesn't work like that, but it was very much just to just get into the action, just this is what you're dealt with, and just go. And it's quite refreshing. It was quite different.
Yeah. Tactically playing that really gives you a different perspective on what bolt action is like when you're engaging in closer range. Like playing 1 or 2 rounds of that will give you some expectations to what to do when you're engaging in small ranges on the real table in the real game.
Yeah, for sure.
And just shows how deadly it is if you can kind of coordinate everything to be kind of in the same area. So it was interesting. We probably need to look at it a few times and expand on it, but I wouldn't mind working it out and turning it into something.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It'd
be really good as a go Gordon.
It's really interesting. That game mode would probably highlight the thing that a lot of people struggle with in bolt action, is that the lethality of your units changes dramatically with a very small number of changes. If you stick a unit out in the open or behind light cover, that makes quite a drastic difference in your ability to secure a kill. And then you're also talking about ranges. You don't have the range penalty. There's a lot of those things that don't become immediately obvious until you've sort of sat there, formed a gun line, and you're pinging shots at each other across, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, and you're not really getting anywhere. You might score a lucky tank kill, maybe a lucky indirect shot, but then you take that all away when you're playing 3x3, and everything is automatically in that dangerous kill zone of all of your weapons. So something like that, it would be a really good, for the lack of a better word, it'd be a really good drill to be like, okay, well, I need to practice decision making in this sort of confined space. And there's a lot of fun in taking something that's quite well tuned, like bolt action by and large, and then intentionally removing a couple of gears and replacing them with spanners and seeing what happens. And
for sure.
And it things like that really highlight how other things work and interact with each other when you do something like that. It was I know Nick down at the club is working on getting bolt action to play in 15 mil. And at a company level, and so many of these questions just start coming up when you try to do that. But it's a fun exercise. Again, you're learning about the mechanics by pulling them apart and trying to break them.
Yeah, and probably the best thing is the purpose is when you come out the other side, it's another way to play games or socialize with people, or just a thought exercise. Like you said, it's the drill example is brilliant. Like I could absolutely see if someone comes to me and goes, I want to get better at playing the game. It's that sort of a setup where you go, right, this is the situation you're given with. Let's walk through left to right the best opportunities that these units have against one another. And then we're going to play it out. Then we're going to show you what actually happens when you do what you said you wanted to do, rather than getting stuck in analysis paralysis in a big game, just going, I have so many options. I just can't process what I need to do. I think there's it'll be fun. I'm looking forward to just sort of teasing that out a little bit and getting revenge. Oh, sorry, was that too subtle? So I think
that was my only win of the month.
Yeah, don't think you're going to win at Skulls. So I think that sort of that idea of thinking about the game and situational, I guess, awareness of the table sort of leads into the bit of the topic that I wanted to talk about, which is overall deployment in a game of bolt action. A lot of times I talk to players and they go, I don't have a plan. I just threw stuff down on the table. That's okay if that's the way that you want to play. But certainly if you're wanting to get consistent results, or if you're wanting to start to, I guess, really use the synergies that are in your list and the way that the game works, it takes a bit more than just throwing stuff down on the table. You do need to think a little bit more about, I guess, deployment is key initially. It flows onto the rest of the game, but today we're going to focus just on deployment. We're not going to go through the mechanics of how the deployment works, with the exception of forward deployment, because even when I read it, I played it wrong for about 2 years before someone went, that's not how it works. It actually works like this. And so it's probably worth just clarifying that part. But we're going to be having an interactive session talking about the types of deployment, why certain units need to be considered, I guess, assigned to certain roles, and what happens if you don't do that. But it will just help anyone who's trying to understand, okay, I want to start formulating a better battle plan. These are some key, I guess, beginning aspects of deployment. And these are all things that come out of military history. They're not just things that we've made up. These will be proper deployment strategies that you can use. But so probably the first thing that we'll talk about is the forward deployment, just to clear that up and get that out of the way. So forward deployment is a special deployment rule that applies to snipers, observers, spotters for other units, but it also can apply to certain infantry units. US Marine Corps Rangers have a different rule. They don't forward deploy, they've got something else. And so that's not including them. But Soviet scout squads, they've got forward deployment. And there's a few other, I guess, more infiltration style units, which they get forward deployment as a rule. The simplest way to think about it is it's not actually part of deployment. So deployment in the rulebook, it'll tell you have to declare your reserves. It'll tell you whether you need to put something in first wave. It tells you where the units are going to go. Once you've decided where all your units are going to go, then you move into your forward deployers. So you can forward deploy if the unit that we're talking about, for example, a sniper, if they were either going to be deployed on the table at the start of the game, or we're in the first wave. They're the only two triggers that allow forward deployment to go. If the model is anywhere else except on the table or in the first wave, it's not going to be able to forward deploy. The mission also has to specifically not say, to use a essentially a double negative that you can't forward deploy. So if it says that you can't forward deploy, then it won't matter how special you think your sniper is. He's coming on from the back edge or outflank. Those missions are few and far between. So once you get to your forward deployment, which is after the regular deployment, then your units can actually forward deploy. And there's some rules and restrictions around that, but that's the timing. People struggle with the timing aspect. And so it's after the regular deployment of your army, and you can only do it if the mission allows it, and you can only do it if they were going to be deployed on the table or in the first wave. Okay. So we'll move that aside. That's
common question every game.
But it's a confusing one. Like I said, I played it wrong for 2 years. I thought it was a nested action as part of deployment, and then you run into issues with wording and things don't match. And the simple thing is to go, it's actually not part of deployment. It is simply a special rule that is applied after deployment is done. And then it all works out. So when I think about basic deployment plans, there's really, I guess, three major ones that come to my mind. The first and most obvious is what I call a balanced core, and that's where your army across the whole 6-foot table is spread roughly equally. You don't have a weak side, you don't have a weak center. Your units are spread roughly equidistant, so you have as much board coverage as you can get with your force. In those cases, your units generally aren't more than 12 inches apart, because you want to make sure that they can run over and support the units next to them. And that's a very classic, just balanced deployment. Just everything center, mid-center, and spread out as far to the left and right as you can, and maintaining an approachable distance for the units next to them. If you do nothing else, start with that. Don't try and get too crafty and like put stuff way out on the right flank without understanding the impact of what you're doing there. Just go. Everything's just going to be center mid as the core, and we're going to be approachable to one another. Being able to do that means that all your units have generally got some support, most likely on the left and the right flank. That's going to make your game easier. It's going to make it a lot easier because you won't find yourself getting isolated and cut apart. It works particularly well if you've got a large amount of infantry, because you can spread those lines quite far. But yeah, that would be, instead of just throwing things down on the table, get a bit of an idea of what 12 inches looks like and keep them around that space. By the way, guys, this is interactive, so ask questions or add commentary. You're both smart dudes who are been playing this game for a while, so, and I know Gorchin has quite a bit more military, I guess, interest and understanding than what I do in some of these things. So please jump in.
I think specifically the only realization, again, realization is not the right word if you're actually just reading the bloody rule book. One of the mistakes that I always made when it came to forward deployment and spotters and first wave and that little balance. I was also playing first forward deployment wrong. I was doing the classic mistake where you do forward deployment first and then you deploy the rest of your army. Now that something like that makes sense in meeting engagement because there isn't a forward deployment, and so the net result is actually what it should be. You do your deployment first and then you do your forward deployment. But one of the things that I sort of, looking back and having read the rulebook now, when it comes to spotters for any artillery piece or mortar piece, when a unit with a spotter arrives onto the board, whether that's from reserve or as part of first wave, and doesn't begin the game on the board, on that first activation die, you can actually move your spotter completely independently on the same die as your artillery piece. And so that means that your spotter doesn't need to be exposed to sniper fire for an additional turn. for example. Something that typically happens in meeting engagement is you've got snipers cracking, or snipers announcing the start of the game, is typically what happens in meeting engagement. Now, in that particular instance, I'm thinking it over and I'm going, there's absolutely no reason for my spotter to be on the board in meeting engagement before first wave. He has absolutely no business being there because the gun's not on the board, and I don't know where his units are. And bringing, one of the things that I typically did was I would bring my fixed weapons on first as part of meeting engagement, and then I'd bring in my flexible core. The idea, of 3 or 4 infantry squads. Then the idea being that I would have nice even coverage, be able to supply a base of fire in any given part of the map, and then I would plug the gaps with infantry as mobile fire teams, as being able to, if I've inadvertently ended up with fire superiority on one corridor by just having more fixed weapons, I'll put 2 of my infantry squads there and I will just force the weak point. And I'm looking back at it now and I'm thinking, forward deployment, how spotters work, that's probably the greatest way to hamstring yourself in the types of decisions you can make across the board. I'm looking at it going, it's like, no, I should be putting my infantry squads on first because they're flexible. And then I can park my fixed weapons where my enemy has exposed, or has presented, I should say, a weak point, and just force it. So that's what I like to do. I typically, I don't deploy generally quite balanced. Once it's all evened out on net, I don't deploy balanced. I try to find the weak point and I force the weak point. It's this idea that I could sit there and I could do strong for strong. If you want to go out of war or whatever, pit my strong point against the enemy's strong point. But in a war game that's dice based, more often than not, because I'm not sort of some pro competitive level player, that usually comes down to the dice deciding and some key decisions that I've done wrong. And I've realized that doesn't really quite work for me. It's not how I like to play. So instead, what I do is I just go wherever the enemy is weak, I will just push that. And there have been some games where I've walked up to their board edge and then started walking across the board because I've just opened up that corridor and I'm just going to try to clean sweep. Now, I don't think my win rate is 50% or better, so I don't know if this strategy works, but it's just how I like to play.
You've made me think there for a few things. Number one, you could bait with the forward deployment themselves, which I never actually considered. Putting something to get them to commit to something else and then just running the unit. But the other thing, so you don't do the forward deployment. How does the dice mechanic work for when you're bringing your artillery piece that's not coming on first wave? You didn't put the spotter in forward deployment. So you commit your run order to get your artillery piece on. That spotter it's another order for him to move, isn't it?
No? It's the same.
Okay. For the deployment.
That's the part.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. It's because they share a dice.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so you can actually move them and deploy them independently, but at the same time.
Wow.
And so with one order dice out of the bag, you can park your mortar on the bottom left corner of your 6x4, and he can just hide in a corner behind a hedge, and you can put your spotter anywhere that they can run to, because they are an infantry model, so they can run 12 inches. So you can run them into a building, which is a horrendously bad place to put any infantry in bolt action in buildings. Run them up against the hedgerow in some hard cover, wherever you need them to do the line of sight. And in something like meeting engagement, where it's your ability to dish out damage, I find it very difficult to justify forward deploying my spotter now. Having read the rule book and doubly so with what Dan's saying here about how forward deployment works, once you realize it, so Jacob, if you see me doing that across the hole in skulls, just throw a shoe at me or something, please.
No, I didn't know that's how it worked.
So essentially, if the unit is put in reserve, you can't forward deploy it anyway. That's just not allowed. So that doesn't matter. But if your unit is in the first wave, then it can forward deploy, but you don't have to. And so where Gorchin was saying earlier, which I 100% agree with, in meeting engagement where literally none of the enemy is on the board, your spotter being on the board is simply a target, and generally a target for a sniper. It's not a good place to be, because the whole point of having the spotter is so you can hide the weapon team a bit more and leverage the line of sight. You don't want to give that up for no return. So, so when the dice comes up to move the team on, yes, that spotter is triggered on the same dice, and it's actually, they still have to be given the same order because it comes from the same order dice. But all teams are generally going to want to move at a run to get the 6 inches anyway. So it's actually no different. You're going to do the run anyway. But yeah, it's very much a, don't give your opponent an opportunity if you've got no way of getting that opportunity back in some way. You're handicapping yourself, as Gorchin said. It's you're hamstringing yourself at the very beginning.
And just to clarify for the people who are listening, this is only for deployment. So don't think that this means that you can move your spotter and your artillery piece every turn.
Correct.
That is correct. Yeah, just deployment.
Yeah.
Just them coming on the board.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
I mean, yeah. Otherwise, you have to assign the dice over, but that's fine.
There's a small little element of poker there that I also learned playing against Matt, who's a very strong local player. Is this idea that showing your hand in a game of bolt action is actually a very simple trap to fall into. And it gives your opponent, who can read hands, such as where you're weak and where you're strong, or where you intend to be weak and strong. If your opponent is capable of reading hands, and that's sort of what I mean by that phrase, putting a spotter on your right flank in forward deployment immediately tells them where you're going to put your weapon team. At the very least, he knows it's not going to be in the same firing line, which means you're going to be looking for a different angle, and there's only so many places. And if the spotter's in a completely commanding field of view, but if he's also in a completely commanding field of view, you're just going to hide your weapon team. And Matt is very good at hiding his hand and forcing you to show yours, or at least I'm not that experienced at bolt action, and he's very experienced. He's very well versed in it. So that difference to me became incredibly obvious, and he very much took the time to explain it to me. He's a great, friendly, and an instructional player to play against. But the part that was really interesting for me, by the time we got to the fourth order dice of the game on the first turn, I had realized what he had done to me, and I couldn't get out of the situation. It was that obvious. And these are the sorts of things that sometimes you just have to see or be done to you, and hopefully we're going to try to prevent that by explaining them here in these podcasts.
Yeah.
So
hopefully
try to get your opponent to show their hand if they can. Because I showed it to Matt and every other hand that I was going to play for the rest of the game, and he read me like a book and stomped me into the ground by the start of turn 3.
It's sorry, go ahead, Jacob.
No, go Dan, because I got a different point.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say it's quite interesting how many of these things in war games actually relate to I guess what would be known as classic military texts and strategy. So Sun Tzu's Art of War is obviously one of the biggest classic names out there. A lot of people will go, oh yeah, Sun Tzu's Art of War. I know about that. But what you're talking about there, Gorchin, actually relates to one of the principles in Sun Tzu's Art of War about misdirection, and it's you need to be able to get the information to perceive what your opponent is doing, whilst hiding your information from the opponent himself. And because if you are armed with the information, you are likely to have a better outcome in the battle. And if your opponent doesn't understand what you're doing, more to the benefit of you, in the outcome of that battle, or something very, very close to those lines. And that what you're talking about there, like the reading of a player's hand and how they're deploying and what they're doing, that's exactly what Matt's doing. He's looking at what you're doing on the board and how you're starting with your deployment, and using those markers to try and understand where's your strategy, where are you going to load your flank, where are you going to put your fixed pieces. Because I know that for your fixed pieces, I'm going to want a different arc of fire that protects me from the rest of your army, but allows me to hit those pieces. And because he's done it to me too, of course. And just going through and watching him do that process is quite remarkable, because he is very good at it. And there's a couple of times where I'm like, yeah, I think I got him on the ropes, and then he does something and I'm completely undone. Like I'm the whole plan just went up the creek.
And he was planning that from 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. He's like, I showed him the army list, and he went, okay, you're going to put those guys on the left flank in that truck, and I'm going to have the howitzer over here, and then I'm going to hit that over there and follow up with the infantry from outflank. And like he's just very good at being able to position and sort those things out. It's why I love playing him. It's a love-hate relationship, but I love playing him. But all these things actually relate back to sound military doctrine, and military, things that it's a real thing, which is why it works.
I think just before we move on to some more bolt action tactics, while we're on it, have we got any specific military strategy, doctrines, theorist suggestions? So Sun Tzu's Art of War has come up. That I think it's now actually in the business section, which I'm not going to make a comment on. But I think that the content itself isn't copyrighted. I could be wrong about this one, but it's what's typically copyrighted is the notes, the analysis, the publication, and the editorial process. So I think you can actually get access to the Art of War legally and freely, but please fact check me on that one. My other suggestion, or I guess my specific suggestion would be, I'm going to sneak two in here because I'm like that, is von Clausewitz on war. He was a German military strategist. And then the other one is Mad Dog Mattis. He did, I forget what the title of the book is called, but I think it's like On His Way of War or something like that. He actually applies a lot of modern business organizational practices to his military structure. He had a lot of officers that weren't assigned to platoons, that were assigned to other officers as coaches. And so you'd have, if you were sort of a lieutenant or a captain leading a platoon or a company, you would have another, sometimes senior officer standing right next to you going, if you do that, your left flank is going to be exposed. Not as a parental sort of don't be an idiot, but just, I'm going to look at this differently than you. Let's get the best outcome that we can. And so those two are really interesting. I think that all being said, most war gamers typically play Ferdinand Foch's military strategy. He was a French soldier who's very well known for saying, my right is retreating, my center is collapsing, my left flank is completely in disarray. The situation is excellent, I will attack.
Sounds right. What makes Jim Mattis Mad Dog?
I think I actually don't think he likes that nickname. He's really good. I think his actual call sign was Chaos, so he usually goes by Chaos. I'm not sure exactly how he earned Mad Dog, but he broke a lot of rules. If you've seen Generation Kill and they complain about being like elite Marines riding around as like armored combatants in like open-topped Humvees, that was his idea, because he looked at the situation, the geography of Baghdad, looked at the guys he had on hand. It was like, oh, this is the best way to win this war, and everybody's like, you're insane. Like, the invasion's never going to work. Of course, it was one of the fastest invasions to have ever happened. So yeah, he's a little bit insane, but in a good way, in the way that you want to be as a military commander.
Sorry, I don't have any suggestions because I haven't really looked into this kind of stuff. But just for those listening, Sun Tzu is public domain, but not the English translation.
Okay.
So you'll find partial translations that are public domain, but yeah, I mean it's republished everywhere. I'm sure you can get it super cheap. What I was going to get back onto bolt action, and we're talking about deployment.
Yeah, we should do that.
Okay. Here's another one. In the basic deployment, what people tend to do is they leave their armor till last, and they might make the decision. So hold on. For your first wave, you've declared your first wave. That unit can't go down and be a reserve for second turn, right?
Yeah, once it's been
that's a
put in
commitment.
first wave, it's locked in. The same as once you put something in reserve, it's locked into reserve.
Mm-hmm. So what people like to do, a basic one of the first things I started doing when I played bolt action, and still kind of do it, so I don't know if it's a great idea or not, is to put your tank in reserve and bring it on second or third turn. Or also, if you don't do that, is you leave it as the last dice and you wait for the opponent to commit his tank, and then you bring yours on and maybe you get a shot or something like that. So what are your thoughts on that particular function of bringing on the vehicle?
I guess it really all depends on why is the vehicle in your list. Why is the vehicle there as part of the battle? If its purpose is to be a tank hunter and then a support vehicle, then it absolutely makes sense to hold off until the enemy armor is deployed so that you can position for advantage. If you are, I often take my tanks as a psychological intimidation factor. So it's actually not, it's not there to specifically kill anything. It's there for the threat that it can kill something. My T-34 with the Russians, it's the 85, so it has the heavy anti-tank gun on it. That's a scary anti-tank gun, and that's gonna, that's possibly gonna put a hole through a Tiger in the rule set that we've got. I'll need a bit of luck, but I can do it. It's also got a very long range, and so any small armored vehicle or medium armored vehicle knows that it's going to be outgunned and outranged from that T-34. And so when I'm setting up with my Soviets, occasionally what I'll do is look at on my deployment edge, where can the T-34 make the biggest impact in that board control element, and I'll put it smack bang in the middle of that space, so that you're going to be forced to hide your armored vehicles or put them in reserve. In the case of my Bulgarians, the Panzer IIIN has a light howitzer on it. I essentially use it as a mobile medium mortar, but it does have two German machine guns. And so given the opportunity, I will hose down some infantry while light howitzering another unit of infantry. So I generally will position that tank as an infantry killer opposite some blocks of infantry. As what happened when I versed Wayne last week, and his two A9 cruisers his two M24 Chaffies were on his left flank to counter my Panzer III on the right flank. They messed it up because I didn't have any anti-tank that was going to be able to deal with them. He got the deployment drop first, deployed one of his tanks centrally. I went off to the right to try and steer away from it. There was some terrain in the way.
He's got another one.
But he's got another one, and I couldn't hide from that one. At that point, it didn't matter if I put it left or right. He had the counter ready to go. So it absolutely can be the right thing to do, but it does depend on why the tank is in your list. As you get towards like the light tanks and the armored cars, I worry significantly less about those. From a psychological point of view, that they serve a completely different purpose in the army again. So it does depend on what you're using it for, and where you put it. but also where you put it, depending on the sort of the three strategies that I was going to be talking about in basic deployment plans. It changes in those as well. So in a balanced force, you probably want your armored assets towards the center so they can go left or right. So you can flexibly adapt to what your opponent's going to doing. If you're deliberately building, let's say you are doing a weaker right of front, and what I mean by that is that the center and the right flank are deployed a little bit further back than what your left flank is. So the engagement will engage with your left first and then your right. Mm-hmm. You might want to protect your armored asset, and so it goes on the right flank. Or if you're going to be hunting or trying to draw something out with your armored asset, you'll put it on the left flank because you want to engage it early. Mm.
Just trying to think what else. I mean, yeah, the only other, I'm sure you might have some more things on the deployment strategies other than just the, I don't know. I'm trying to describe what you're saying, where you've got everything's kind of spaced out so it's even across the board. But
yes.
Outflank as well is something that I'm having some trouble deciding what units to commit to it and which ones not to, and how much. There's a few different thoughts on that. So I've been on the receiving end where people have committed 2, 3, 4 units to outflank, and that can be quite strong, especially on something like Demolition, because you have this big supporting arm that's really coming for that objective. And then I talked to other people like Nick, and he's on the thought process at the moment that I don't commit anything to outflank. It's kind of a risk. I don't know what's going to happen. I can dictate what I'm going to do if I come strong first turn with everything, and I can take an early initiative. So there's pros and cons to all of it. But yeah, I'm still in the decision-making mode of how many troops I want to put on outflank. If I want to put on any, my list has changed overnight because I've silly put up a poll asking people which theater selector they want me to choose, and I've practiced one list for a month, and now I'm picking another because that's become the more popular option. But I'll figure that out. I put the little challenge out there. I think it'll be fun anyway.
It will be fun. You will still, over the last month, you have still learned some things, so it's not like you won't be able to apply that. I'm not normally a fan of changing your list like just overnight from a poll, but I understand why you did it, and that's fine. And I will say, you're not the only person who has I guess made some adjustments like on the spot or Sorry, just trying to sort my display out because it's gone a bit. There we go. Who's done things on the spot? There's been quite a few at this event that have just gone, I think this is going to work. I'm not sure. I haven't really play tested it. Exactly, Gorcham. Yeah. There's a number of you that have done the same thing. So what that should mean is that you're all going to have fun.
Definitely.
You're all going to be in that same boat. But yeah, I think from an outflank point of view, the first piece of advice that I have specifically is there we go.
Cool.
If you have more order dice than your opponent, it's more feasible to put something into outflank. You still need to think about what that is, but it means that you have very little risk of altering the order dice in the bag. So you maintain control of what you're doing for the regular board and for your regular deployment, and you have that ace up the sleeve for that one unit that's going to come in. In that scenario, the tank is not a bad option to put in outflank. It can be protected for 2 turns. It's going to be able to come on, almost halfway up if you need it to. You can wait that extra turn and bring it on just over halfway up, because obviously the point is halfway, but you drive forward. So So if you've got that dice advantage, it's less risky. When it's equal, it depends on the mission type. It really depends on the mission type. If you are needing to capture some objectives that are loaded up on the left or the right, having a unit that can come in from the side is quite good. But you could just as easily get to those sometimes just by deploying everything and just running forward on the first turn, and that puts you in striking distance. So that one's a bit harder when it's equal dice. If you have less dice than your opponent and you are not a veteran force, do not outflank. And what I mean by that is the veteran level is going to keep your stuff alive a little bit longer, make sure you can keep moving, and obviously make sure you can come in from outflank relatively successfully. But when you are already short diced and you are taking potentially 2 or 3 dice, I wouldn't take 3 dice if you were short diced, but if you're taking 1 or 2 dice and putting them into outflank, that's 1 or 2 dice that are going to do nothing for 2 turns. That's a lot to lose. A good example of that is if you're playing a 12 dice list at 1,000 points and your opponent is playing a 9 dice veteran list, let's say it's German, just for argument's sake, and the German player puts a Panzer IV, a truck, and a unit of grenadiers in outflank, that means they're only fighting you for 2 turns with 6 dice. There's a lot of things that can happen within a game, but I would back your 12 dice list to cripple the German list sufficiently enough that when those other 3 dice arrive, it doesn't matter. It's too far gone at that point. You have 6 extra dice with which to position your force to receive the turn before they actually hit. And when you're doing your deployment savvy, you will have put an anti-tank threat on each flank, sort of center left or center right, so that they can position to the flank. So that takes care of the Panzer IV. And then you only have to worry about the infantry. Now you're not going to be able to guess which side the infantry are on. But if 80% of your army has destroyed 50% of your opponent's army because the other 50% is essentially stuck in the back lines or in reserve, that's going to be very hard for them to actually make an impact. Like, they might come on and destroy one of your units, but then what? The rest of your army is deployed down the field, destroying the rest of their army. So if you have less dice than your opponent, even if you're veteran, be very careful about outflank, because when you are outdiced and you choose to reserve something, if the mission forces you to reserve, that's different. Because then you know that something's out of the fight. But when it's your choice, you really got to think about that. Most of the time, you want all your assets deployed as fast as you can, because you have 6 turns to use those 9 dice to get your opponent down to 8 dice. And that's the starting point. You got to get 4 dice off them, and then you can think about doing something different. And we talked a bit about that with dice advantage stuff before. Like, you don't want to fight those odds.
No. Any other thoughts on deployment?
I think when it comes to the outflank and reserve, it's again having, for me, it's always been a case of having an objective and a role for each unit. And that way you can decide, looking at the terrain, looking at the map, the objective marker layout, what knowledge you may have of your opponent's list. It'll allow you to make the reserve and outflank decision on a game basis, but at the same time, you're not deciding which units are going in reserve and outflank, because that's what you decided when you built your list. you're deciding whether or not they are more useful in outflank.
Yes.
And so, say for example, if you're running an outflanking high mobility infantry assault, infantry and transports, you might have flamethrowers, you might have a bunch of SMGs or assault rifles or whatever. If you're thinking about that unit, if you've got a road that runs right from your board edge right up to where you want to put them, I would submit there's probably no need to put them in outflank. You might put them in reserve, but that gives you more control. They can come in turn 2. If you've got an opportunity to break the hold in the objective in turn 2, and you don't think they can pivot around long enough, or you can create a blocking force for that assault to work in the time, you can do that turn 2. Alternatively, you could decide that turn 4 is better. But with outflank, you're starting at turn 3. You don't have the flexibility. The flip side of that, of course, units and transports, you can use them as a quick reaction force if they're on the table. If you've misread your opponent's hand, and by the end of turn 1, you realize that they're going to shift fronts, you've misread it, you need to reposition. Sometimes having even a medium-sized squad of 6 or 7 guys in a transport could be all that you need to slow down that front, slow down that advance, and so you can do something somewhere else, or you can counterpunch on the same flank. So it's about needing to make that decision on that particular game, and also just very quickly evaluating if it is the right decision and pivoting if it isn't. I played a game against one of the Mundane Knights. It's another quite high caliber gaming group here in Perth. I played it was against Clive, and I had this game plan in my head, and everything was going according to that game plan, and I still lost by a reasonable margin. And that's something that you have to think about. Just because your plan is working doesn't mean you're winning. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize, and I certainly didn't in that game. I realized turn 2 that this plan wasn't really going to win. It was weird. I was looking at it and going, this is not the best strategy, but the plan's working. And so you end up in this sort of mixture of sunk cost fallacy and what's worked before has to keep working. And credit to my logical biases and my logical failings, they proved to be correct. The plan was working, and it continued to work after it had already worked. So that was all correct, except of course it didn't win me the game. So these are some things that you need to really think about. And it goes again back to what we were sort of saying about some of the military strategy and stuff. If you've got a plan and it's working, just double check to make sure that you're winning the game, because those two things aren't always the same. Sometimes it's the plan's fault. Sometimes it's your opponent putting you in that great situation that nobody likes to be in, where they realize at turn 5 that they beat you at turn 2 because they read your plan and they let it happen anyway, and they just lured you into that trap to do whatever you wanted to do. So those are some things that I'm now thinking about when I'm deciding reserve or outflank. I'm running a 12 dice list for skulls, which would be the maximum, and that again, it allows me to make that decision. If I was running a 9 dice list, a full veteran, for example, I wouldn't be able to make that decision. I would be more or less forced to not outflank or reserve. And again, sometimes that makes it a little bit easier for my opponent to realize what it is that I'm doing, because it's one less decision he's got to figure out, or they have to figure out.
They can spend more time.
Thanks for that, Gotcha. I'm having a think about more, not necessarily coming with the game plan of the outflank. Obviously, I want to come up with something, figure out what potential units I want to use, but I'm guessing I should more take a browse at the opponent's list and look at the terrain before committing to what I had planned before I got to the table with the outflanks in particular.
You should always just have that quick check, that quick assessment to validate. Okay, let's just look at the terrain. Oh, I'm actually fighting in a canyon. Outflanking is probably going to be fairly safe because I can jump on top of the ridge, and you know, and I can shoot down, but I can't get assaulted. That sounds pretty good. If, on the other hand, the center of the board held a mountain and you were coming on from the side up against the mountain, outflanking actually generally won't hold as much benefit. Your opponent's going to have the high ground. You're going to have to work hard to get up from the flank. It would have been better to go up the ground from the back of the board and spend a couple of turns shooting and try and whittle the defense down than coming on. Yes, you'll be at full complement and full strength, but you'll be attacking defenders from the side who probably haven't been attacked by the main force yet.
Yeah.
So all you're doing is taking a full strength engagement and giving them the height advantage. That's not ideal. I mean, that's obviously clashing a little bit of real world with game world, but it's that sort of idea. You know, Surround the Mountain has the same problem. If they're still on it and in it, you know, you haven't really accomplished. You cut off their line of retreat. That's about it. But there's probably caves in that mountain with supplies.
I've got one more thing for outflank, I guess, and that is committing to one side or both.
Ooh.
Do you double up on one side? Say you got 2 or 3 outflankers. Do you have one strong push on one side, or do you even it out?
What's your plan, Jacob?
I don't know yet. I'm going to go to the club today. I'm going to actually figure out what this list can do. I'll read it out because, you know, lists have been submitted or they will be submitted on today. I'm probably not going to publish this episode until tomorrow anyway. So let's go through. My skulls list is 10 order dice, 955 points. I've gone for 1941 DAC Armored Recon. So what this includes is, instead of the traditional Lieutenant plus 2 infantry squads, I have to take a requirement of 3 armored cars. So my first armored car is the 222, but I've shaved off the light auto cannon for points, and it's just the MG variant. Then I've got a 222 with the light auto, and then I've got an 8 rad with the light auto. So that's my first half of the force. So it's a third of the force. It's less than 300 points. In fact, I spend a lot more on infantry, but these are going to have to be supporting elements to the infantry themselves, not necessarily sure if they're going to be leading the front or if they're going to be behind the troops or whatever, but we'll get to that. Obviously, there's objectives all throughout this event, so I needed as many objective takers as I can, but ones that are strong, with the caveat that I've already spent, 250 points or whatever it is on armored vehicles. So I've got 3 full strength 10-man veteran rifle squads, which are 10 men. I've just gone for no upgrades to weapons. I've gone back and forth with a lot of like LMG lists, and they tend to not really do as much as I hope. So I found that bodies and veterans are strong, and necessarily the gun doesn't matter. And in fact, rifles are really good. Then I've got medium mortar with the spotter. I've got a medium anti-tank gun, a light howitzer, and a Panzer 3G. And the Panzer 3G is the light tank, which is the 8 armor, and the medium anti-tank gun. So I'm hoping that I can, with my artillery and mortar pieces, basically secure my side of the board, and also utilize them for any sort of objectives that they need to capture on my side, and then really pushing in with the infantry and supported by a 222 for each squad, pretty much, and then maybe an outflanking Panzer 3. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's going to depend on the opponent you face.
Yeah, definitely.
It's going to depend on the terrain and whether you have a good approach vector, and it will depend on the mission being played at the time. So with all those, I guess, mobilized vehicles, for demolition in particular, putting the 3 armored cars, they're all wheeled, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah, so putting the 3 armored cars and doing a split of 1-2, so you put 2 on one flank, 1 on the other, and literally waiting till like the end of the turn, that's not a bad idea, because providing that they come onto the board, they can run 24 inches, and so from either side of the board, unless they put it in the middle, you're going to be able to get it. You're going to be able to capture it, and that means that the worst case scenario you're going to have is a draw because they might get yours.
Yeah.
But I would recommend that's not a horrible tactic, even if you just went, because if you need the guns at the back end, and so you just take leave the light tank guys behind, and take maybe the MG guy and what was it, Panzer III?
Yep.
Yeah, you could take the Panzer III. Now that adds a bit of weight onto the Panzer III, but it also gives your opponent the reason to question, where's that Panzer III going? Do I need to defend against it? So what you're trying to do is to trick them into focusing on the Panzer III, so the armored car can run on and take the objective.
Just take it. Yep.
And just take it. Now, you might want to bring it on at turn 4 instead of turn 5, because if they put something in front of that objective, you won't be able to run through it. But look, that's not bad. But it will. The other 2 missions, maybe in key positions you would outflank, but I probably wouldn't. I'd probably just, especially at 10 dice, that's almost the point.
It's too
almost at the point where it's possibly too risky to put too much in reserve on those numbers, based on the conversation that we had before. Key positions I probably wouldn't. I'd probably just run them straight on, and just push up instead of worrying about coming in.
I think there's a very high risk reward play that you could do there. And you guys know me, I like to play aggressive and risky. Look, this is not to invalidate everything that we've talked about so far, and I absolutely would like to stress the high risk of this strategy. But one thing you could do is literally park all 3 of your armored cars on the same outflank.
Yeah.
And then if you really wanted to go nuts on that and really give them hammer and anvil, you also park the tank in that outflank on the same edge. And then you literally you hold, just like infantry with fixed weapons are really great at doing. You set up a multi-tier defense, you sit in cover, and you just do the Neo thing, just wave them in. And then, maybe turn 3 is not the right one. Maybe you do turn 4. Turn 4, you just rolling thunder in off this flank and just start deleting everything on that flank.
Gosh, this sounds really fun.
But that's really risky, because if I saw that happening, my 2 options was to match your total and hope to survive against an assault like that, which you won't. You'll take some serious hits from that armor. There's no 2 ways about it. Even their own armored cars. Yeah.
But it's like 7 machine guns.
Or the slide autocannons. There's a good chance you'll be able to outmaneuver any cover bonuses, any range bonuses, because if you deploy center, if you deploy your infantry center in like a tiered defense, I'm not going to be able to pick the board edge with any real certainty.
Yeah.
But if I sit there in total, I've got numbers advantage and I'm defending, and you should never be in that position. What I would need to do is play into your reward payoff, rush forward, expose my flank, and try to kill the units that are already on the board. So when the armored cars do come from, armored cars do come on, I'm going to take a big hit, but that'll be fine. Hopefully, I'll have killed enough of yours and kept most of mine alive that your tanks will then flounder. But look, if you were playing a a friendly, or more accurately, unfriendly game, that's a really fun bit of hammer and anvil that you could
do. It's interesting because if I was then playing, if I saw all the armored assets, and then you even at the point where you said they were in reserve. At reserve, I would be cautious about whether or not you're just going to wait until, if you come towards my base, I'm going to bring on 7 machine guns and hose down anything. I don't care. I'm just gonna wipe it off the board. That's an option. You could actually play that defensively and put the tank and 2 of the armored cars in your reserve with the intent to just protect your base. Move all your infantry towards the opponent and just push through. And then if they bring something on, you've got 3 assets to come on and cause some 4 assets to come on and cause some havoc. If you told me that they were definitely going to outflank, I would forsake my base, and I would take my entire army and I would rush your base, because I'll have numbers advantage and play for, if I can get there fast enough in 3 turns before you can get to my base, I'll be able to hit it and potentially get the win, or be in a position that when you hit mine, I can hit yours in the same turn, and we'll logger it out as a draw. The difference will be those bonus points.
Yeah, that's going to completely change everything.
So that's because normally it's just destruction of the base and it's fine, but yeah, so that'll be quite interesting. I think there's a few lists that might give you a hard time. If you decide to put that many in reserve, like Gorgon said, it's a big risk. It also risks that when you go to bring them on, that you pass their morale checks to bring them on. If they come on piecemeal, it's going to hurt, but not them.
So I've got a few things for you, Dan or Gorgon, whoever can answer this best. So for Demolition itself,
anyone else feel like Jacob's just trying to get information out of us to play, like to get the workaround of the event here?
This it's a prime. Just interrogate the TO. It's like, how do I win your event? All right, here's Jacob. You get 3 more questions. Otherwise, we're going to disqualify you.
Fine.
Not disqualify him. Not disqualify him.
Just negative 2 points.
Let's just say that you will still only have 1 win over the whole month.
Yeah. We're going into July now, so we'll see how we go. Okay, Demolition itself.
Yes.
Can either player block the whole base with intervening models?
Yeah, absolutely they can. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's one of the strategies is to take. You can do it with 1 infantry unit. It's better with 2, on the basis that if one routes or gets blown up, there's another there. But you can actually completely surround the base with the 10, 12 models. I've done it before with my free rifles. Bad idea. Oh man, they evaporated quick. But you essentially take your 50 mil objective, put the unit around it, and what that does, it does 2 things. First of all, it means that you can't actually touch that base physically unless you kill that unit in an assault, because you're not allowed to approach within 1 inch of a unit normally. So it creates a 2-inch barrier off your objective. It does make that unit a target. So if you're going to do that, veteran infantry is nice. So if you get assault engineers with body armor is better, because they basically need natural 6s to kill them. Just if you're going to do that to any of the Soviet players watching, your opponents will get extremely frustrated if you also put a commissar, a lieutenant, and a medic within 6 inches of that objective. just so you know. Because then you're obviously 6s to hurt them, but then 6s to save. They've got the morale boost of the lieutenant, and if they somehow fail the order, the commissar shoots someone. Now you don't get to use the medic from the commissar. I tried that, doesn't work. But It's extremely resilient.
So the medic ignores the fact that there's been a casualty. He was meant to die.
Well, that's specifically for it's on the rules interaction from the commissar, and it was designed deliberately to avoid certain other triggers as well. So if the commissar actually performed a shooting attack, rolled to hit, rolled to wound, and that then caused a casualty, that means that the unit, by application of the rules, like a friendly fire scenario from a FUBAR, that unit then has to take a pin. It would then potentially need to take morale checks. It would then, all that sort of stuff. The commissar is written up so that it's an exception to those rules and doesn't follow them. He simply auto-kills a guy.
Yep.
And a medic's not allowed to attempt to save any of that, because the medic's only allowed to attempt to save a casualty caused by shooting, damage caused by shooting. Now, those explanations still don't help you, by the way, if you do that and you put all three of those officers supporting that unit. What was best about that unit was they had 2 Panzerfaust and anti-tank grenades, so even when they did bring something on, and a flamethrower.
That's a good demolition defense.
The flip side of that is, of course, that's 4 order dice parked in defense, and
it's almost
Soviet.
It was almost
how many
400
points. Yeah. So if you were doing something like that in Skulls and you were able to get another 8 order dice with some cheap transports and stuff, you're talking 600 points at 8 dice to try to take the opponent's demolition objective. Yeah,
and they're probably all inexperienced rifles.
Well, to get 600 points and 8 outer dice, they pretty much have to be.
They pretty much have to be, yeah. But either way. So yeah, you can surround the base and stop it. You can also, I've seen people do with, for example, with your armored cars, you could do a parking lot around the objective, because then even if they attempt to assault you, I'm gonna
TO it right now.
I'm gonna do something I don't normally do as a TO, because I know this is gonna air after the event, almost likely. So there's no impact of me going on about this except for you two. And I'll know if you're doing it because I'll watch you. So Jacob, you have, 4 vehicles?
Yeah, 4 vehicles. Yeah.
So what happens
I know where this is going.
What happens when a vehicle becomes a wreck?
It's terrain, right?
Yeah.
Specifically impassable terrain.
Yeah.
And so you can use soft skin transports, park them empty in front of an enemy tank, block off a street. You give your opponent an order dice, but their tank can't continue down that street, for example.
Oh, no. That's not where I was going. It's better than that.
No, I know where you're going, but that was the clue.
Yep.
Oh, that's a clue. It's a bit different in that instance because, for example, if you do it with a transport, they get removed and captured as opposed to destroyed if they're closer to the enemy. So they would just move up to them and auto kill. I would just move up to it.
So transports, in that case, I thought they were destroyed, not removed.
Let me double check here.
Because in that case, that specific example wouldn't work. But yeah, you sacrifice vehicles and turn them into impassable terrain. Use them as roadblocks or
any kind of enemy other than a friendly unit, aside from another empty transport, they're automatically removed from the battle and counters destroyed.
Removed.
So remove is probably the word that I would think we'd be caught on.
Yeah, fair enough. But you can see where I was going with that.
Yeah, because destroyed isn't actually a damage result. It's a status of the vehicle. However, when a vehicle becomes wrecked from damage, so being an assault or howitzer or any form of damage they're going to try and do so they can get through to your objective. Either way, a vehicle that is wrecked counts as impassable terrain. So you could just park your armored cars and your tank in a square around the objective. They're not allowed to assault it unless they've got anti-tank weapons, they're not going to be able to assault it well. They can't come within an inch. Your vehicles are a couple of inches wide. And if they do destroy them, then they're not transports, so they're not going to get removed from the table. They'll just become impassable wrecks, which means that you can't cross them, which means that you can't get to the objective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't play that kind of party. That's just
I didn't say that.
No, I saw.
It is. But they're the rules.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I saw that opportunity very quickly. Like, I played a game of Demolition, and then I looked at the stuff, and I was just like, man, you could really do a dirty right there and then.
I will say, if you're fighting Matt with his fins, do it.
It's the only way you'll get a draw.
Yeah, and then if he says anything so much as a syllable about it, I'd be like, Dan told me to do it. Here's the TO.
Yep. And I'll hear about it and I'll deal with it.
On Demolition, something I didn't think about, but I've kind of realized on playing it a week or so ago, is traditionally I will place my base in wherever is the best cover. That might be on the left flank and that might be on the right, which sucks for outflank. So it's best to just put it in the dead center on your edge.
Unless you're playing against Finns.
In which case, it sort of doesn't help at all. But or if you are playing Finns, 2 units protect that base, at least 2 infantry units, because he can only attempt to kill one of them, and then you just hose down and try and kill the rest. But yeah, look, it all depends on the terrain, really, but also what your opponent has. If you look at your opponent's list, minimal armored vehicles, no transports, put it left or right, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
You should be protecting it with at least 1 unit. 1 infantry unit is easier to deal with, unless it's a flamethrower.
Typically,
if you see him with a flamethrower, just put yourself the other side of the objective so that he has to get close to try and shoot over it, and then shoot him back. But yeah, if they've got mobile threats in that sort of vehicle variety, you don't want to put it left or right. It's too easy for them to move on 12, drop a unit out 6 to 18 inches up the board, and now they can do an assaulting action next turn after they would have shot you up this turn. But that's fairly standard. So I think, have you got any other questions, Jacob, around outflank? And that's genuine. That's not a stop bothering the TO about it, but that's a genuine thing. Have you got any other questions?
No, I just thought it's interesting making the decisions between outflanking or not, the decisions between reserves and not. The counter is that you could have everything taking the initiative if you don't play that game, and you can kind of dictate it in your own way. But obviously there's a huge strength to something appearing from which side you don't know. So yeah, it's something I need to play with, and in variations. I need to try out flanking on both sides at the same time. I need to try out flanking with a heavy push on one, and then I need to also play games where I don't play that at all, and then try and weigh up what's going to work for different lists, different terrain, different scenarios, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, see, that's an interesting segue, to be honest, into probably one of the other basic deployment plans in terms of what side specifically. So I was just going to say, I generally only go through one side. I generally only outflank on one side, and I just have to be very tactical about which side I choose. Most of the time I get it right. Sometimes I get it wrong. Sometimes I get it really wrong. But I normally do that when I deploy in something called refused flank. And so generally what that means is I'm taking majority of the units on the board, like the high majority, 90%, and they are either on the left flank or the right flank. Not much in the center, nothing on the other flank. And so your opponent looks at the board and they go, in the square, Dan's entire army is in this box, even though he's got, 12, 15, 16 feet to play with. It's all in this little box. And that, going back to what we were talking about with Matt, he would look at that and go, I'm going to get pushed extremely hard on that flank, extremely hard. And the one of two ways of using outflank with that deployment is to put it on the same side, in which case you are trying to just break it. You're trying to just break it through and create essentially a line of attack in the opponent's flank. The other option is to spread it out maybe a tiny bit more towards the center and actually put the outflanking unit on the other flank. So you've got some board presence there. And that the purpose of doing that within the war game is in case you need to protect an objective, or in case, because you've loaded your flank up so much on the other side, your opponent peels off to deal with that. And so they start moving things back towards their center off their left flank, which means that the right flank is now not engaged. You come on behind their defensive line and you start causing all sorts of mayhem. But generally, I have to make that decision at the start of the game before any of the deployment has happened. I just know in my game plan, looking at the terrain, am I in a better position to try and spread out a little bit more and have something come on from the right flank, which is opposite to where I'm going to bulk up? Or do I just stack everything on this side? And essentially what you do is you take a 6-foot board as the frontage of what your battle line would have been, and you instead turn it to a 4-foot frontage. And you put your entire force across a more condensed space. And the theory is that your opponent is only fighting with a 2-foot frontage. And so I have a 4-foot frontage that can zero in and apply a lot of pressure to break that flank, whilst his flank out here is swinging around to engage with me. I've already dealt with a large chunk of the army. It's just gone. It's tricky to do sometimes in bolt action because you got to think, like, you got to consider obstacles in particular because they slow your infantry down. But if it's open on that run on that flank, you can easily take 2 units and run them 12 inches on, and that's a big problem. Anyone that's had a unit run 12 inches on their flank at the end of a turn, knowing that they're in position to do something next turn, it's not good. And cavalry is even worse because they go 18. Or motorbikes, Jacob, a motorbike unit.
I've been thinking about it.
The motorbikes are even more frustrating because you normally bring outflanking units on at the end of the turn unless you need to deliver on something. If you need to deliver on an objective because of time or whatever, then you do that. But the reason you bring them on towards the end is they can leverage the double move, which is the coming on, do their shooting action, and then at the top of the next turn, you immediately activate them again and you follow up. Motorcycles are frustrating in that because they come on, they might have some shooting, but then it's a fresh turn. So they can use their escape reaction. And they all just disappear. There's no reprisals for them. They just come on, harass, and then get lost. I haven't figured the best way out to deal with them yet. But yeah, so that refused flank can be quite powerful. It's much more powerful against an army that doesn't have mobility. Minimal armor, no transport. If they've gone heavy on team weapons or fixed assets, it's perfect against those armies because they can't reposition. And what you want to do is try and load up your flank a small bit at a time until they put most of their fixed assets down. And sometimes that doesn't happen until they've done all the infantry, so you're just going to have to pick a side. But occasionally they'll do it wrong. and they'll put their fixed assets down first, and you can just look at it and go, that's less scary than that one, and so we're just gonna, everything's on the right flank, and I'm just gonna bring something on. I'm gonna hammer that poor unit in the first turn that I drop on, and like people putting units in backboard edges is my favorite. It's my absolute favorite, because it's sort of there's obviously reasons for it. I do it myself, but in terms of the vulnerability that creates, it's almost an instant order dice if you've got the ability to drop something in outflank. It's very easy to convert that over. And then the other classic sort of deployment battle plan, which is, we sort of hinted at it before, but this is a proper hammer and anvil sort of setup. So one flank is set up to be the stronger and essentially the anvil, what you're going to try and get the opponents to hit and just hold. Gorcham mentioned it before. This is where like your fixed infantry with their weapon teams for support, you advance them up into position and you do not move. That is just where the position is. That's where you hold. That's where it all starts. And the idea is that the enemy hits that and stops, or bounces. Bounces is better, but hits that and stops. And then your left or right wing, whichever you've chosen to be the swinging hammer element, they then force and push the enemy onto the anvil. It's a little bit trickier in board gaming, in bolt action particularly, and that's mainly because aside from vehicles with guys in there as transports, you don't have a lot of, I guess, really fast moving elements to really get the force of that hammer. It's one of the reasons why outflank is used to do that. Is because you can get that I guess the uninterrupted force coming in, but you have to wait. Any armies with cavalry can actually do this extremely well. So because they've got that 18-inch move, they can position better, and they generally, those cavalry can charge into combat, and they're brutal when they do that. They charge 18. They generally are all either tough fighter or have some other close combat efficiencies. But 18 inches, man, it's such a big sweep on the board. And so when that swings around, generally they'll break whatever unit they've hit, and your hammer's already swinging, because now they have to deal with the fact that there's cavalry there, but I'm still being shot at by the gun line. And so the gun line moving, if the hammer is swinging in from the left, you got left or right there.
Yeah.
That'll be you.
Yeah, that's right, but whatever.
Yeah. So it's coming in from the right, and your anvil's here, and the enemy's obviously lined up here, right? So if the cavalry have hit and they've broken the first unit, this anvil gun line, everything it needs to do is put pins on the next unit, so that the cavalry can hit it without it being a problem. They'll break that unit, and then these guys shoot the next unit. And so you slowly work through the flank of the enemy, pinning it in place, hitting it with cavalry, pinning it in place, hitting it with the cavalry. It'll obviously take a couple of turns to do that. You may find the enemy breaks. You may find that the enemy breaks before you actually get through all those units, or does something different. But that's the idea, and that comes from, I mean, the hammer and anvil stuff has been around since ancient times. You know, got the phalanx there, use the cavalry to push things into the phalanx, and hit them on the side. You know, hold, break on the flank. It's tantamount to a lot of war games, to be fair, but it requires a bit more practice in bolt action, because you can't move your entire army all at once.
Definitely some interesting deployment options now to decide which one to use.
And it's not all of them. So earlier on, I referenced about like weaker side deployments and trying to get certain parts of your force to engage before the others to give them time to maneuver. You can do that on the right, the center, or the left flank, just by adjusting up and down how far away those units deploy. Because essentially, the closer you are to the enemy,
full range.
Yep. The closer you are to the enemy, the more likely it is that unit is going to hit contact first or get shot at first. So you can actually control that and move things. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. Like we're not even getting into the types of units and weapon options that you can use to support. And combined arms warfare in bolt action is extremely important. Extremely important. I know people complain about light machine guns or certain other weapons not being as effective as what they want them to be. The reality is, for every unit that doesn't have a light machine gun, yes, you could put 2 other rifles in instead. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And technically, you gain 3 of the 4 shots because the loader now doesn't have to load, so you get 3 shots. But you can still only shoot 24 inches, and your optimal range is still only 12 inches. Sometimes, in a lot of cases, you want to be engaging before that. You want to be engaging at 18 to 36 inches, not for damage, but for the pins, to force some form of suppression on the opponent. So what I've found really difficult with my Bulgarian force is I've got light machine guns in the squads, but I'm only able to get 1 light machine gun within those squads. I don't have a medium machine gun to throw down additional long-range fire. And after that, I've only got howitzer and a mortar, really, to provide pin support. So my enemies are generally getting closer with less pins on them, as opposed to my Russians, where I have that machine gun that's able to just put a couple of shots in. I've got a couple of machine guns in each squad, which are able to just make sure that I've got that dice conversion into a pin. And I'm finding that's quite pivotal in in how the army performs and what I need to do to deploy. So it's quite interesting. There's a lot there that we probably even haven't touched on, but we'll leave that alone.
Yeah. I think that's a great discussion on deployment and options, and probably I think we'll leave it at there for the strategy for today.
Yeah.
And we can pick up on a whole new point for the next episode, hopefully in person.
When we talk about when we get to other types of theater selectors and platoons, then we can start looking at something different. So like anti-tank gun platoons would deploy totally different to a regular army. Armored columns are able to deploy totally different to a regular army, just because of the flexibility that those things offer or don't offer. But yeah, we'll leave that. We'll come back to that.
All right. If we've got nothing else, I think we might call the episode. So that was the Historical Miniature Gamers Podcast, episode 4, Road to Skulls. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope to see many of you at the event in 2 weeks.